A banh mi costs around $1 to $2. A cup of coffee can be just over $1. A short Grab ride can sometimes cost less than the tip you would leave in the United States. And in some beach cities, you can still find hotel rooms for around $20 a night. Those prices sound like something from a travel video filmed 10 years ago. But this is still Vietnam in 2026. However, there is one problem. Vietnam is developing very quickly, prices are rising, tourist areas are getting more crowded, and some things are no longer as cheap as those viral YouTube videos once made us believe. So, the question is Vietnam still cheap for Americans in 2026? Let's find out with J30 World Discovery. The US dollar still has a lot of purchasing power in Vietnam. The first thing an American will probably notice when arriving in Vietnam is that the numbers on Vietnamese money look incredibly large. 100,000 dong, 200,000 dong, 500,000 dong. But in reality, as of August 2026, the USD to VND exchange rate is still around 25,000 to 26,000 Vietnamese dong for $1. The central exchange rate announced by the State Bank of Vietnam on August 21st was 25,600 dong per US dollar. That means with just $50, an American traveler has the equivalent of more than 1.3 million Vietnamese dong. And what is interesting is that many of the things an American needs during a normal day in Vietnam still cost only a few tens of thousands of dong. But one thing needs to be made clear. Vietnam in 2026 is not exactly as cheap as Vietnam in 2016 or even 2022. During the first 7 months of 2026, consumer prices in Vietnam increased by an average of about 4.39% compared with the same period a year earlier. In other words, Vietnam is still cheap for Americans, but it is getting more expensive. And the place where you may notice that most clearly is food. Food is still one of the best bargains. If you eat like a local, Vietnam is still extremely hard to beat. A street-side banh mi usually costs only a few tens of thousands of dong. A bowl of pho, bun bo, or noodles at a casual local restaurant usually costs only a few dollars. A Vietnamese coffee can cost less than a bottle of water at many US airports. And this is something I find really interesting. In the United States, $10 sometimes is not even enough for a fast food meal once you add tax and a drink. But in Vietnam, if you actually eat local food, $10 can potentially cover all 3 meals in a day. You could start your morning with banh mi and coffee, have rice with meat, eggs, and vegetables for lunch, then eat a bowl of pho or bun cha for dinner, and you might still have enough left for a sugarcane juice or a salted coffee. That is also why those videos showing tourists buying a banh mi for around $1 are not completely exaggerated. But there is something very important to remember. Walk just a few streets into a tourist area, step into a Western-style brunch restaurant, order a burger, pizza, steak, or imported drinks, and your bill can rise very quickly. So whenever someone says, Vietnam is incredibly cheap, the next question should always be, cheap for what kind of lifestyle? If you come to Vietnam and try to live exactly the way you would in Los Angeles or New York, Vietnam will not feel as cheap as you expected. But if you eat the way Vietnamese people do, it is a completely different story. The services that can surprise Americans. This is probably where I personally notice the biggest difference. Food is not the only thing that is cheap. Labor-intensive services in Vietnam can also cost far less than they do in the United States. I've been to Da Nang before, and I had a very good experience there. A 45-minute head, neck, and shoulder massage cost around 200,000 dong. A day pass at a gym cost around 100,000 dong. You can also find basic barbershops where a haircut costs only a few dollars, inexpensive laundry services, and spas that an American traveler could visit several times during a trip without feeling like they were spending too much money. Part of the reason is simple. Wages in Vietnam are still much lower than in the United States. Starting in early 2026, Vietnam's regional minimum wage ranges from around 3.7 million to 5.31 million dong per month depending on the region, equivalent to roughly $141 to $210 based on the conversion figures published by the Vietnamese government. Of course, this is only the minimum wage. It is not what every Vietnamese person earns, but it helps explain why services such as haircuts, massages, and eating out can be sold at prices that are much lower than in the United States. And for a traveler who earns their income in US dollars, that difference creates a huge amount of purchasing power. Getting around can also be extremely cheap. Then there is transportation. If you have ever used Uber in a major American city, you are probably used to paying $15, $20, or even $30 for a relatively short ride. In Vietnam, Grab works in a similar way, but you also have an option that Americans do not see as often: Grab Bike. A short motorcycle ride can cost only around $1 or $2. A car will cost more, but many short trips within a city can still be only a few dollars. In places like Da Nang, things become even more interesting because you may not need transportation very often at all. If you choose a hotel in the right location, there could already be dozens of coffee shops, restaurants, convenience stores, massage shops, and even the beach within walking distance. That is a type of savings people often forget to include in their travel budget. It is not just that the ride itself costs less. Sometimes you do not need the ride at all. What about hotels? This is where the answer starts to become more complicated. You can still find simple rooms in Vietnam for around $15 to $30 a night, especially in cities like Da Nang and during the low season. And that does not necessarily mean you are staying in a terrible room. You may still get air conditioning, a private bathroom, hot water, Wi-Fi, a small refrigerator, and a location just a few minutes walk from the beach. If you increase your budget to around $30 to $60, the quality often improves significantly. And if you want an upscale hotel, resort, or 4 to 5-star experience, you can easily spend $70, $100, or more per night. However, in many cases, that amount of money can still buy you an experience that might cost several times more in a major American city. But Hanoi, central Ho Chi Minh City, famous resort areas, and major holidays will usually be significantly more expensive. So do not watch a video showing a $15 hotel room and assume that every hotel room in Vietnam costs $15. Location and timing still make a huge difference. So what can $50 actually buy you in one day? Let's build a fairly comfortable day for an American traveler, not the backpacker lifestyle of eating instant noodles and sleeping in a hostel, but not a luxury vacation either. Breakfast with bánh mì and coffee, around $3. A few Grab rides during the day, around $4. Lunch at a Vietnamese restaurant, around $4. A massage, around $9. Dinner, around $7. A few drinks or small activities, around $5. And a decent budget hotel room, around $18. Total, about $50. Of course, these are not fixed prices, and you can absolutely spend more. But what is remarkable is that in Vietnam in 2026, $50 can still potentially buy you an entire day of travel, including a place to sleep. In the United States, in some cities, $50 can disappear after just one dinner and one Uber ride. That is the real difference. And if you are watching this video from the United States, let me know in the comments. What can $50 buy you for one day in your city? If you enjoy videos comparing life and the cost of living between countries, don't forget to subscribe to J30 World Discovery. We still have a lot of interesting places to explore. Things in Vietnam that are not cheap at all. Vietnam is cheap, but not everything is cheap. International brands, high-end electronics, imported products, Western food, imported alcohol, and goods designed for higher-income consumers can cost almost the same as they do in the United States, and sometimes even more than Americans might expect. An iPhone does not suddenly become cheap just because you are in Vietnam. A steak at a 5-star hotel does not cost $2 either. And in popular tourist areas, the difference between the local price and the tourist price can be huge. In my opinion, this is one of the most common mistakes people make when they visit Vietnam after watching videos about how cheap it is. They do not just want Vietnam to be cheap. They expect everything in Vietnam to be cheap. But that is not how an economy works. Things that are produced locally and designed for local consumers usually offer the best value. Imported products or services designed specifically for international tourists can quickly move much closer to international prices. So, is Vietnam still cheap for Americans in 2026? My answer is yes, very cheap, but no longer unconditionally cheap. If you eat local food, use Grab, choose reasonably priced hotels, and live somewhat closer to the way Vietnamese people actually live, the purchasing power of the US dollar here is still very impressive. Around $30 to $45 per day can work for someone traveling fairly frugally. Around $50 to $80 can give you a much more comfortable trip. And with $100 or more per day, you can start enjoying a level of comfort that would usually cost significantly more in the United States. But if you only visit tourist areas, eat Western food, and choose premium services, you may leave Vietnam wondering, wait, I thought Vietnam was supposed to be cheap. And maybe that is the most accurate answer of all. Vietnam is still cheap in 2026, but the real secret isn't just how much money you bring, it's how you choose to spend it. What about you? If you had $50 to spend for one day in Vietnam, would you use it to try as much local food as possible, get a massage, stay in a nicer hotel, or spend most of it exploring? Leave your answer in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video from J30 World Discovery.